Sarah Mitchell had exactly $10 in her checking account when her sister convinced her to accept that blind date. 32 years old, single mother of a 6-year-old daughter, working 60 hours a week as a cashier to pay rent and bills in Chicago. She had no time for dating, let alone money to waste, but her sister Jessica insisted. The guy was a friend of a colleague, seemed kind, and Sarah deserved one evening for herself. So Sarah spent those last $10 on a small gift, a box of artisan chocolates, because her mother had always taught her you don't show up empty-handed when someone invites you. When she walked into that elegant restaurant on the Chicago River that evening, trembling in her only good dress bought 5 years ago, she didn't know that the man sitting at the corner table was Michael Carter, 38-year-old CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in America, worth $200 million. And she didn't know that that humble gesture, those $10 spent from the heart, would change her life and her daughter's forever. Because what Michael saw in Sarah that night wasn't the modest clothes or the work-worn hands. He saw something all his millions had never been able to buy him: authenticity. Sarah's alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, like every day. The small apartment in Austin, a neighborhood on Chicago's west side, was dark and cold. Sarah got up silently to avoid waking her daughter Emma, who slept in the only bedroom. She'd been sleeping on the living room couch for 3 years, since she'd left her abusive ex-husband with just 2 suitcases and a 3-year-old child. She prepared quickly, putting on her Target uniform where she worked. 32 years old, brown hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail, tired green eyes still capable of smiling. She'd left college in her 2nd year when she got pregnant. The marriage had been a mistake. Her husband, Ryan, turned out to be violent and alcoholic. The divorce had cost everything they had. Now, Sarah worked 6 days a week, 10-hour shifts, to afford that tiny apartment and give Emma a decent life. No luxuries, no outings, no vacations, but Emma had clean clothes, hot food, and went to school. That was all that mattered. That Saturday morning, while preparing breakfast for Emma, before taking her to her maternal grandmother, who watched her during the day, the phone rang. It was her sister Jessica, 35 years old, married to an engineer, living in a nice apartment in Lincoln Park. Jessica was calling for the umpteenth time to convince Sarah to accept that blind date. A colleague of her husband knew a single, professional man looking to meet someone genuine. He'd asked if they knew a serious, intelligent woman not just interested in money. Sarah had refused for weeks. She had no time, no appropriate clothes, no money for restaurant dinners. But most of all, she didn't want to risk getting hurt again. Ryan had taught her not to trust easily. But that morning, perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps because loneliness weighed more than usual, Sarah said yes. Jessica exploded with joy on the phone, promising it would be wonderful, that this man seemed really decent, that Sarah deserved a happy evening. After dropping Emma at her grandmother's and before starting her shift at Target, Sarah stopped by the bank to check her balance. She'd received her paycheck 2 days earlier, but after rent, utilities, groceries, and medicine for Emma who'd had the flu, exactly $150 remained for the next 2 weeks. She looked at the balance on the small ATM screen, and her heart tightened. How could she afford a date? She didn't even have a decent dress. The only outfit she owned was the one bought 5 years ago for a cousin's wedding. Black and simple, now out of style. During lunch break at Target, Sarah talked with her co-worker Gloria, 55 years old, a widow who'd worked there for 20 years. Gloria had become a kind of adoptive mother to Sarah, always ready with advice and encouragement. When Sarah told her about the date and her worries, Gloria laughed. She said clothes didn't matter, that if a man was truly interested, he looked at the heart, not the label. She lent Sarah a simple but elegant necklace she'd received from her husband, saying it would bring luck. That evening, back home after her shift, Sarah pulled the black dress from the closet. She ironed it carefully, tried it on. It still fit, though it was visibly old. She looked at herself in the mirror and for a moment saw not the tired cashier, but the girl she'd once been, the one who dreamed of graduating in literature, traveling, having a happy family. The day of the date arrived too quickly. It was a Thursday evening. Sarah exceptionally had the day off. Jessica had told her the man would wait for her at 8 at the signature room on the Chicago River, a place Sarah had only seen in photographs. Surely expensive. Sarah was about to leave when she stopped. Her mother had always taught her you never arrive empty-handed when someone invites you. It was a matter of manners, respect. But what could she afford? She looked at her wallet. She had $20 that had to last until the next paycheck. But pride, that dignity that not even poverty had taken from her, prevented her from showing up empty-handed. She went out and headed to the small artisan chocolate shop nearby, run by an elderly man who made handmade chocolates. The smallest box cost $10. Sarah spent them, feeling a knot in her stomach, but knowing it was the right thing to do. With the small box wrapped in elegant paper under her arm, Sarah took the L train toward downtown. She watched the other passengers, people in expensive clothes, talking on the phone about dinners and happy hours as if they were normal things. She felt out of place, an intruder in a world that didn't belong to her. When she arrived at the restaurant, her heart was beating so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The entrance was elegant, with glass doors and a doorman in livery. Sarah hesitated, tempted to turn and run, but then she thought of Jessica, who had organized it, of Gloria, who had lent her the necklace, of herself, who deserved at least one evening of normalcy. She entered. Michael Carter sat at the corner table of the restaurant, nervously checking his watch for the third time. 38 years old, CEO of Tech Venture, the company he'd founded at 25, and that was now worth $500 million. He wore a custom suit, a Rolex on his wrist, drove a Tesla. On paper, he had everything. In reality, he was deeply lonely. His assistant David had proposed this blind date after seeing him refuse yet another invitation to social events. David knew Sarah through Jessica's husband and had described a serious woman, single mother, who worked hard. Michael had accepted more to please David than out of real interest. In the last 10 years, Michael had dated dozens of women, models, actresses, entrepreneurs, heiresses, all beautiful, all charming, all interested in his money more than him. They came with expectations, calculations, hidden agendas. Dinners were performances, not conversations. Intimacy was transaction, not connection. Michael had stopped believing that something authentic could exist. Maybe it was the price of success. Maybe real relationships were only for normal people, not for millionaire CEOs living in a bubble of privilege and suspicion. When Sarah entered the restaurant, Michael saw her immediately. Not because she was the most beautiful, there were others more striking, but because she seemed so out of place, so nervous, so real. She wore a simple black dress, visibly old but clean and carefully ironed. Her hair was pulled back practically, makeup minimal, and she clutched a small box as if it contained something precious. Sarah approached the table with uncertain steps. Their eyes met. Michael stood, extending his hand. Sarah shook it. Her hand was warm, slightly rough, the hand of someone who works. For some reason, Michael found that detail beautiful. They sat down. Sarah placed the small box on the table between them, cheeks slightly flushed. Michael looked at the box, then her, questioning. Sarah explained with a timid voice that her mother had taught her never to arrive empty-handed. It was just a small thing, artisan chocolates from the neighborhood. She hoped he liked them. Michael was speechless. In 10 years of dating high-society women, no one had ever brought him a gift. They received, didn't give. And here was this woman, who evidently didn't have much, bringing him something made from the heart. He opened the box. The chocolates were simple, handmade, wrapped in colored paper. Nothing like the Swiss luxury he usually bought, but there was something in that gesture, in that simplicity that touched Michael more deeply than he wanted to admit. The evening began with awkwardness on both sides. Sarah was intimidated by the restaurant's elegance, by the prices on the menu that would cover her monthly rent. Michael tried to put her at ease, but he felt the invisible barrier between their worlds. Then, slowly, they started to talk. Sarah told him about Emma, her curious eyes, endless questions, how every day was an adventure seen through a child's eyes. She spoke of her work at Target without shame, with the dignity of someone who knows every honest job has value. Michael listened, fascinated. This woman wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was simply herself, tired, real, authentic. She spoke with passion about her daughter, gratitude for small things, hope despite difficulties. He began to tell about himself, but carefully editing. He didn't mention the fortune, the company, the successes. He spoke of loneliness, pressure, how sometimes having everything meant having nothing real. Sarah listened with those green eyes that seemed to see beyond words. There was empathy there, understanding, not judgment, not calculated interest, just genuine listening. When the waiter brought the check, Michael took it immediately. Sarah protested, trying to offer at least her share. Michael gently refused, saying he had invited her. But he saw the discomfort on her face, the wounded pride of someone who doesn't want to be in debt. He walked her out. The Chicago air was fresh, the river gleaming under the streetlights. They walked slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. Michael asked if he could see her again. Sarah hesitated. There was something about this man that attracted her. His kindness, the vulnerability he let show. But she was afraid of being hurt again, afraid it was too good to be true. Finally, she said yes. They exchanged numbers. He called her an Uber. She protested, saying she could take the train. But Michael insisted, and this time Sarah accepted. In the Uber heading home, Sarah looked out the window, her heart full of conflicting emotions. It had been nice. The man seemed kind. But Sarah had learned not to trust easily. And then there was Emma to think about. She couldn't afford to bring someone into her life who would then disappear, hurting her daughter too. Michael returned to his penthouse in the Loop, the $3 million apartment with a view of all Chicago. He sat on the designer couch, looking at the box of chocolates he'd brought with him. He ate one. It was good, simple, made with care, just like Sarah. And in that moment, Michael Carter, the man who could buy anything, realized he'd found something all his millions could never purchase. In the following days, Michael and Sarah began texting, simple conversations that slowly deepened. Sarah talked about Emma and her days at Target. Michael responded, still careful not to reveal too much about his true situation. After a week, Michael proposed a second date, this time something more informal. He suggested a walk through Millennium Park. Sarah accepted, bringing Emma. Michael said that was perfectly fine, curious to meet the child Sarah talked about so much. Michael knelt down to talk with Emma, bought the biggest bubble kit, and for an hour they were 3 people chasing bubbles across the lawn. Michael saw how Sarah was an extraordinary mother with so little. When Emma fell and scraped her knee, Sarah turned tears into laughter. It was pure dedication, without nannies or help.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
When they parted, Emma spontaneously hugged Michael. But the following week, everything changed. Michael had to attend a charity gala. During the event, a journalist interviewed him. The article came out the next day. Michael Carter, America's richest single CEO, worth $200 million. Sarah saw the article at Target during her break. She read with growing disbelief. Michael Carter, CEO of tech venture, $200 million. The man who had played with her daughter, who had told her he worked in tech. She felt the world spinning. Why had he hidden everything? What did he really want from her? A poor cashier. The phone rang. It was Michael. Sarah declined the call. Michael realized something was wrong when Sarah started ignoring his calls. After the third attempt without response, he sent a message. Sarah replied coldly, saying she'd seen the article and they needed to talk. Michael understood immediately. His secret was out. He asked if they could meet, but Sarah said she preferred to talk by phone. When they finally spoke that evening, the conversation was painful. Sarah asked why he hadn't told her who he really was. Michael tried to explain. He'd wanted her to know him as a person, not as a CEO. He wanted someone who saw him for who he was, not what he had. But even as he spoke, he realized how weak the excuse sounded. Sarah pointed out that honesty was the foundation of any relationship. By hiding the truth, he'd taken away her ability to decide with all the information. He'd made her believe he was someone similar to her, when in reality they lived in parallel universes. Michael tried to defend himself, saying money didn't define who he was. But Sarah interrupted him. For her, money meant hours of work, sacrifices, impossible choices between medicine for her daughter and food on the table. For him, they were numbers in an account, insignificant. How could they truly understand each other? The call ended without resolution. Sarah said she needed time to think. Michael was left holding the phone, feeling lonelier than he'd felt in years. In the following days, Michael tried to reflect. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he'd been selfish. But his heart told him that what he'd found with her was real, precious. He couldn't simply let it go. He decided to do something he never did: seek advice. He talked with David, his assistant, who had orchestrated the date. David was brutally honest. He told Michael that if he was truly interested in Sarah, he had to show her he wasn't just a rich CEO playing at being normal. He had to show her he understood her world, respected her struggles. But how? Michael had no idea what it truly meant to live with little. He'd forgotten that reality 25 years ago, when he was a kid building computers in his parents' garage. He was so far from that world now. It was David who suggested something radical. If Michael wanted to truly understand Sarah's life, he had to live it, at least for one day. So Michael did something absurd. He took a day off, a rarity, and went to Austin, Sarah's neighborhood. Not in the Tesla, but by train. Not in a designer suit, but in jeans and a simple t-shirt. He walked the streets. Sarah walked every day. He saw the Target where she worked, the small park where she took Emma, the bakery where she bought discounted bread at the end of the day. He talked with neighbors, shopkeepers. He felt the neighborhood's life, the solidarity, but also the struggle. Dreams compressed by necessity. And suddenly, Michael understood. He understood why those $10 spent on chocolates had been such a grand gesture. He understood why Sarah had hesitated to accept the Uber. He understood the fierce dignity of those who have little but refuse to lose self-respect. That evening, Michael wrote to Sarah. Not a message, but a real letter, handwritten. He admitted he'd been wrong not to be honest from the start. He admitted he lived in a world of privilege that had made him blind to realities others faced every day. But he also said that what he felt for her was real, authentic, and if she'd give him a chance, he'd prove he was worthy of her trust. He didn't ask to see her, didn't make grand promises, just a humble admission and a hope. Sarah received the letter 3 days later. Sitting on her couch bed after putting Emma to sleep, she opened it with trembling hands. As she read, she felt something move in her chest, anger mixing with understanding, fear fighting with hope. Michael had admitted his mistakes. There was vulnerability in those words, authenticity, but Sarah was still terrified. He was a billionaire. She was a cashier. What future could they have? She talked with her sister Jessica. Jessica was surprisingly practical. She asked, "Did Sarah feel something for Michael?" Sarah admitted yes. She liked how he talked with Emma, how he truly listened, how he made her laugh. Then, Jessica said, She deserved at least an honest conversation. But it was Gloria, her co-worker at Target, who said the thing that changed Sarah's perspective. During a coffee break, Sarah told her everything. Gloria listened in silence, then said something simple but profound. She said her husband, God bless him, had been a simple factory worker. They'd never had much, but he'd been the richest man in the world in the ways that counted. Kindness, faithfulness, love, money came and went, but a good heart was forever. The question wasn't how much Michael had, but who he was as a man. Sarah reflected for days. Then, one evening after putting Emma to bed, she sent Michael a message. She told him she'd agree to see him again, but on clear conditions. She wanted complete honesty. She wanted to go slow. And most importantly, she wanted him to understand that she and Emma were a package. If he wanted her, he had to respect that her daughter came first. Michael responded immediately. He accepted all conditions. He proposed meeting, but this time at her place, in her neighborhood, in her world. The meeting was different. Michael arrived by train, without a driver, without ostentation. He brought ice cream for all three, not from a famous downtown gelateria, but from the neighborhood ice cream shop Sarah frequented. They sat on the park bench while Emma played on the swings. Michael was brutally honest. He admitted his world was full of privileges he'd taken for granted. He admitted not truly understanding what it meant to count every dollar, worry about bills, choose between necessities. But he also said he wanted to learn, wanted to understand, and that he'd never met anyone who made him feel so real, so human. Sarah listened. Then she spoke, with the same honesty. She said she was afraid of being hurt, afraid it was a rich man's whim, afraid of bringing Emma into something that would then end. She said she had nothing to offer materially, that her life was complicated and difficult. Michael gently interrupted her. He told her that what she had to offer, authenticity, love, integrity, was worth more than anything his money could buy. He told her Emma was extraordinary because she had an extraordinary mother. And he told her that if she gave him a chance, he'd do something every day to deserve it. It wasn't romantic in a cinematic way. There were no grand promises or extreme gestures. It was just two people looking into each other's eyes and deciding to try, despite fears, despite differences. In the following months, Michael and Sarah built something real. They went slow, as Sarah had asked. They watched movies at the neighborhood theater, not in private screenings. They ate pizza from boxes, not at Michelin-starred restaurants. Michael came to Emma's school recitals, to soccer games at the park. Sarah got to know the side of Michael the world didn't see, the man who woke at 5 to work not from greed, but from passion for what he built, the man who donated millions to charity but didn't tell anyone, the man who cried at sad movies and laughed at Emma's silly jokes. Michael learned Sarah's strength, how every day was a battle won with grace, how she transformed the little she had into abundance of love. He learned that true wealth wasn't in his bank accounts, but in how Sarah made people around her feel special. A year after their first date, Michael took Sarah and Emma to a special place. Not a luxury restaurant, but the small garage in the suburbs where he'd founded his company 25 years ago. He showed them where it all started. A rickety table, second-hand computers, dreams bigger than his wallet. There, in that place that represented who he truly was, Michael knelt down, not with a $1 million ring, but with his grandmother's ring. Simple gold, worn, full of history and love. He asked Sarah to marry him, to build something together, to teach Emma that love counts more than any bank balance. Sarah said yes, tears flowing freely. Emma jumped on both of them, shouting that finally she'd have a dad. The wedding was 6 months later. Not in a luxury villa, but in Sarah's neighborhood, in a small church that had seen generations of families. Jessica was the witness. Gloria cried with joy. David, Michael's assistant, discovered he had much in common with Sarah's sister, and they started dating. Michael wore a simple suit, Sarah a white dress bought together, choosing not the most expensive but the one that made her feel beautiful. Emma was the flower girl, serious and proud. When they exchanged rings, Michael whispered something only Sarah heard. He thanked her for teaching him what it meant to be truly rich. Sarah smiled, responding that he'd also taught her something, to believe in love again. Life after the wedding wasn't a perfect fairy tale. There were challenges. Sarah had to adapt to a new life. Michael had to learn that time was more precious than money. Emma had difficult moments, fearing Michael would leave like her real father had. But they faced everything together. Michael created a scholarship fund for single mothers wanting to finish college. He called it the Sarah Fund, even though she protested. Sarah resumed part-time studies, finally finishing the literature degree she'd abandoned. Gloria retired, and Michael offered her a part-time job managing the mentoring program for young entrepreneurs at his company. Jessica and David got married 2 years later. But the most important thing was that no one changed who they truly were. Sarah continued buying artisan chocolates from the neighborhood. Michael continued taking the train when he could. They taught Emma that a person's value isn't in what they have, but in what they give. 5 years later, sitting on the same couch where Sarah had slept for years, now in her study in the new house they'd bought together, not a mansion, but a normal house in a normal neighborhood, they watched Emma do homework. Sarah turned to Michael, looking at the man she'd married, not the millionaire CEO, but the man who played hide-and-seek with their daughter, who laughed at her jokes, who loved her not despite who she was, but precisely for who she was. And Michael looked at Sarah, the woman who had spent her last $10 to bring him a gift, not knowing that gesture had given him something 200 million could never buy, a heart that beat for him not from interest, but from love. They'd both learned that true wealth isn't counted in the bank. It's counted in shared smiles, held hands, I love yous, whispered before sleep. It's counted in lives touched, kindnesses given, love that grows every day. And it all started with $10 and the courage to believe that maybe, just maybe, true love still existed. Like if you believe true love overcomes any economic difference. Comment if you've ever judged someone too quickly. Share this story of dignity, authenticity, and love that conquers all. Subscribe for more stories, proving the heart matters more than the wallet. Sometimes the smallest gestures reveal the biggest hearts. And sometimes the person who seems to live in a completely different world is exactly who we've been waiting for all our lives. Because true love doesn't look at bank accounts. It looks at the soul.